Welcome to another episode of Legislative Matters Now with M&M. I'm Melissa Southall, Self-Advocate Coordinator for the ARC and People First.
And I'm Morgan Spicer, Special Projects Coordinator with the ARC of the Mid-Ohio Valley. Thank you for joining us. The purpose of this show is to educate self-advocates and anyone, for that matter, on the important topic of legislative advocacy. Now, every month, Melissa and I take a piece of legislation and explain it in an easy-to-understand manner and why it's so important.
We also speak to a self-advocate in our Advocate in Action segment as they talk about how they are using their self-advocacy skills to help themselves or others live a more independent life, just like everyone else. To begin the show, we have a segment titled, Who You Gonna Call? Because when you have a question about a legislative issue, you want to make sure you call the right person so you can get the results you want.
It could be a city council member, a state lawmaker, a member of Congress, or an expert in the topic you are concerned about. Let's get to this month's Who You Gonna Call?
Today on Who You Gonna Call, the Americans with Disabilities Act turned 32 this year, and you want to know how well things are going. So who do you call to find out? A, your city council member. B, your state House of Delegates or state senators. C, your U.S. senator or U.S. congressmember. Or D, a state agency that specializes in what you're looking for. What do you think, Melissa?
I would say D, a state agency that knows what you're looking for.
How about you, Morgan?
I'm going to go for D, state agency.
You are both correct. A state agency that specializes in what you're looking for. The Americans with Disabilities Act became law in 1990. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. The purpose of the law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. The ADA gives civil rights protections to individuals with disabilities similar to those provided to individuals on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, age, and religion. It guarantees equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities in public accommodations, employment, transportation, state, and local government services and telecommunications. The ADA is divided into 5 titles or sections that relate to different areas of public life.
The Americans with Disabilities Act turned 32 years old in July. To explain what the ADA is and what it's not, our guest today is Kim Knuckles, who is the Equal Employment Opportunity Director and ADA Coordinator for the Department of Administration for West Virginia at the Capitol in Charleston. Thank you, Kim, for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me so much. I'm honored to be here and really excited about this opportunity.
To begin with, Kim, can you please explain the Americans with Disabilities Act and who it is for?
Absolutely. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which is commonly known as the ADA, it is one of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation for people with disabilities. It was passed in 1990. It was amended in 2008. And what it really does is it attempts to provide equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities in all facets of public life. I think that's the most important part. It's divided into several sections by title. So Title I of the ADA, it requires employers that have at least 15 employees to provide individuals with disabilities with reasonable accommodations. And it prevents employers from discriminating against people with disabilities during the hiring and promotional processes. So that's a really important title. Title II, and this is really what my job focuses on primarily, it mandates that state government and local government provide equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities, and that covers all state programs. So that's including education, healthcare, social services. This portion of the ADA is frequently used to, for states to provide equal access, and that's equal access to health insurance like Medicaid and any other means-tested state programs. Title II also calls for accessible public transportation, which is very important, and it does set standards for new accessible public transportation vehicles. Title III, which is not something I deal with directly here in my role, but I do receive a lot of phone calls and emails about Title III because that really prevents exclusion and discrimination in public accommodations. So we're talking about stores, restaurants, hotels. So I do receive a lot of communication about that. It also applies to private corporations that provide transportation services. So that would be bus companies, for example, that would be airlines. And the regulations implementing this section of the ADA go into a lot of detail as well about how buildings should be designed. So in terms of state government, I work very closely with state agencies on designing and retrofitting to allow access for people with disabilities. And finally, there's Title IV, and that requires the phone companies and broadcasters to provide closed captioning and telephone relay services, which of course allows an individual with a hearing or speech disability to place and receive phone calls. So it's really there to provide protection. And it's especially important in areas of employment. I think state and local government services, which is what I primarily focus on, and public accommodation, to make sure that they can participate in all facets of life.
Although it is federal law, are there any state laws that go along with it that people need to be aware of?
Well, this is a great question, and one I actually receive calls and emails as well. Because we all know, I mean, the federal government sets standards. Again, it's a federal civil rights law. And some states have the ability and do have, let's say, more stringent requirements or certain types of requirements that differ or that clarify. West Virginia does follow the federal ADA. Of course, every year during our legislative session, sometimes there are things that are introduced that, may or may not pass. But we primarily follow the federal ADA. We don't have really anything that stands out or that certainly is in contradiction. It's something that is there that, especially in my role, if there is an individual with a disability in state government who needs an accommodation in their job, I am really here to act as that liaison. So in terms of, state laws, I am here to help facilitate, to make sure that they can do their job. That's really why I'm here. And then the second prong of that, the Title II accessibility to state buildings. West Virginia doesn't have any more stringent requirements. Again, we follow, the Access Board guidelines. But I am really here to make sure we are enforcing those. And if we need to retrofit something, we do. We want to make sure individuals have access. So that's the most important takeaway from that. We do follow the federal ADA.
How much progress has been made over the past 32 years in fully implementing and following the Americans with Disabilities Act?
This is also a great question, right? We have, since 1990, this has been something that we are trying to grow. We are trying to learn. I mean, this is the first comprehensive federal statute in history. 65 plus million Americans with disabilities. It really reshaped communities by opening inaccessible spaces. That is the biggest thing I've seen. I remember being a little girl. My grandfather was diagnosed with MS when I was very, very young, and he used a wheelchair. And in 1983, trying to navigate daily life was really difficult. I have very vivid memories helping my parents lift him and push him upstairs, downstairs, trying to squeeze him through small doorways. I personally see the biggest change over time has been with accessibility for individuals who have, had physical impairments. And that is something that's a really huge change. I mean, there are obviously lots of folks out there with hidden disabilities. I think it has been a slower progression for those individuals, unfortunately, depending upon, their needs. Challenges have just been economic stability, having equal opportunities in inclusion. I think those are things that we deal with on a daily basis. We try to fight the good fight. Individuals with disabilities continue to have the highest unemployment rate of any group, which is something we are constantly fighting for. And I think that's something we're going to keep fighting for. But I think the biggest change initially over the course of the last 32 years has been the public access. And then for me, second to that, I think came the methodology for defining reasonable accommodations. That was something in the very beginning. especially in the 1990s and early 2000s, courts, having a law degree and being an attorney, courts really were limiting who was considered to have a disability. And that is something that I think has greatly improved just in terms of defining that and the methodology and process for that. And in terms of areas where I think we are growing and still need to grow, and I know in my current role, this is something that my team here, and I'm so happy I have a staff now. When I was just the ADA coordinator, and I don't say just lightly, it was me. I was kind of a one-woman band, for lack of a better phrase. I didn't have a staff. And now I have an executive secretary and an investigator. So I'm thrilled to have this new role and to have the help. And we really focus on the education piece, the outreach, and the policy development, which I think is key to moving forward. I think that's the most important part. And that's where I see us going in 2022 and 2023.
Can you talk about some of the things that are misunderstood about the ADA, such as parking space requirements or automatic doors?
I can absolutely do that. And I may add a few things if you don't mind. There are lots of, I guess, things that are misunderstood, swirling about, some things that are misleading and myths, right? We have those sorts of things. So again, I receive a lot of calls and phone calls, and I'm so happy to help. And this is where the education piece comes in, because for every person I tell, I hope they tell a few folks, and we grow from there. So in terms of parking space requirements, everyone thinks that, okay, well, if we have the blue marked spaces, we're good to go, right? I see that accessible wheelchair symbol, which, some of the listeners here may have noticed a change. There has been somewhat of a change. We had that static wheelchair symbol. Now, and hopefully the camera can get this, I'm kind of leaning over. Now we have a more mobile individual in a wheelchair who's kind of leaning forward, showing to me they're just moving through society. We're moving forward. I think that's very symbolic. But they think if it's just marked and there's no sign, that it's an accessible space. And that's actually not the case. The signage is the most important. And when we're talking about signage, we're talking about, you see that space and there is a sign, and the requirement is that it be 5 feet above the ground. And visually, it needs to be that height, right? Because when you're parking there, you wouldn't be able to see the sign. It has to be high enough that you can be able to see it. So for example, ticketing a vehicle, if there's no sign, it's probably not an accessible space. So that is something a lot of people don't really realize. You can also, if you wanted, and maybe this is something, I don't know if this is good or bad, but if you wanted to paint it another color, you could. There's really nothing specific in the requirements in terms of the symbol being there or it being a blue paint color. It's just something historically that has been done. It's probably going to continue because that's what everyone recognizes. So I'm actually a proponent of that because I want, people to recognize that and not park there. But the sign is the most important. Without the sign, it's really difficult to enforce. So in terms of the automatic doors, and this is very frustrating for me at times because I think having automatic doors makes good business sense just generally. And I say that because if you're an individual with a mobility impairment, if you're maybe a mom or a dad with a stroller, if you are like my mom, who, we have a genetic disorder in my family. She has a very difficult time walking. She walks very slowly. She trips a lot. She falls. So she does use a cane. It's really difficult for her, especially if she's alone, to open a door, to have access to a building. So to me, it just makes good business sense. But unfortunately, the federal ADA does not require automatic doors. So having said that, obviously you still need to meet all the height, width requirements, the door pressure requirements. And I always say it's just a matter of really just public policy and sense. If you have automatic doors, on the other hand, they have to work. So if you do have them, they need to function. And if there's a button there and the door is not automatically opening, that's a problem. But no one is going to require you to install automatic doors in your business. So that is something I think that's misunderstood about the ADA. Dealing with the employment, I thought maybe I would just discuss and talk about a few other things. A lot of individuals will say to me, okay, well, I may or may not have a disability in terms of the definition. I don't know if I meet it, but if I say I do, they probably can't fire me because I have a disability, right? Well, that's actually not the case. Anyone can be fired. Anyone can be fired. You just can't be fired because of your disability. I think that's really the important takeaway from that. And in terms of accommodations, Another myth, that maybe something that's misunderstood, is that the individual with a disability can really make the demands and say, well, this is what I want and this is what I need to do my job. But there's a reason the law says reasonable. It doesn't say best accommodation. It's what's reasonable for all parties. And I think that's truly the takeaway. It's what best fits the employee, accommodates them, and also the employer without undue hardship. And so I think that's something that's misunderstood about the ADA. And another big one is, my business is small and I don't need to comply. I have less than 15 employees, so I don't need to comply with all the ADA stuff. Where technically that may be true, but in my mind, why would you not? It makes, again, the best business sense, and you should do it anyway. So when someone calls me and says that to me, that's generally what I tell them. And I'm here to offer solutions. There are so many things that you can do to make your business accessible that, in my experience, my over a decade of doing this now, are not cost prohibitive. They can be done, like, for example, a temporary ramp. It's really not cost prohibitive. So I really do encourage businesses to do that if they can. And most of the time, they're pretty amicable and they want to do it. They want to make their business accessible and they want to do a better job. Again, it's back to that education piece. I think sometimes individuals just need to be educated on the topic.
Next.
If people see something they think violates the ADA, what is the procedure to report it? Do they call your office or should they call to the business or entity first?
This is also a great question. I receive lots of calls about potential ADA violations. In my opinion, and I think this is always best, it's always best to call the business. So whether it's the business owner, if you're able to get in touch with them, or the manager, if it's a building, it's always best to touch base first. I have found they've generally been open to discussing, to having a dialogue and a communication about it and trying to fix the problem. If that does not work, there are different ways to go. Obviously, if it is something dealing with the state, so if it's a state-owned building, something the state leases, it's a government entity, then yes, I want the individual to call me, absolutely. We handle state government, that's what we do. So unfortunately, when it comes to private businesses, that falls under Title III, right? So there's nothing, states unfortunately can't really micromanage and tell private businesses what to do. And in that case, depending, a complaint may need to be filed.
If there is a true violation of the ADA, what is the remedy? Are there fines or other enforcement, like the state correcting the issue and then sending the bill to the business or entity in violation?
Also, these are fantastic questions. So Title I, we'll just quickly talk about Title I, which is the employment portion, which we discussed earlier. Any individual has the ability to sue. Obviously, that's something we try not to encourage in society. We want to try to work things out, whether it even be through mediation, arbitration, et cetera. But the remedies may be money, right? A monetary award. It may be rehiring that person, for example. A lot of people think, oh gosh, I'm just going to sue and get money. Well, maybe that person wants to actually have a job, right? I love when people want to work and they want to feel productive, and I think most individuals do. So maybe rehiring that individual and putting them in another role. That's absolutely a remedy. I think people just think, oh gosh, so you get money. No, you can, there can be restitution in other ways. In terms of Title II, which of course is state and local government, if the local government won't fix the problem, that individual can always contact the DOJ, which is the Department of Justice, the Disability Rights Section. I send many individuals there. But most important takeaway from this is they need to do so within 180 days of the action complained of. So there is a time limit, like so many things, right? In our legal world, there is generally a time frame or a statute of limitations. So in terms of the action complained of, whatever that may be, they do need to contact the DOJ Disability Rights Section if they want to start a complaint within 180 days of the action complained of. Of course, an individual always has the right to hire a private attorney and to file a lawsuit that way as well. And Title III, for places of public accommodation, injunctive relief. They can hire an attorney, they can try something, they can use legal aid, for example. If money is an issue, which we always understand, they can ask for injunctive relief. They can always do a motion for attorney fees as well. And the AG's office, which a lot of people don't realize this, but our Attorney General's office here at the state can actually ask to join the suit and ask for money or ask for the entity to refrain from the act or acting in a certain way. And that's really what injunctive relief does. So in terms of Title III, the AG's office is the way to go.
Anything that you would like to add?
I think I'll just end with this. My annual EEO conference is coming up, and now that I am handling all 9 areas of discrimination as well as my ADA role, which I love, and I'm so happy to continue doing that, I'm actually doing a piece on just kindness and people first language, which I think is so important. We're really in a time now where it's a combination of, I think, people really want to try. They don't want to say or do the wrong thing. And I always tell them, just do your best. And if you're unsure, ask, right? Ask if it's okay. Ask if, I hope I said the right thing, or I didn't say anything that, hurt you, or just really, truly be nice and be kind and be respectful. And just truly, treat individuals with disabilities like a person, just like anyone else, because that's truly all they want. They want to be productive members of society like the rest of us. They want to be helpful. So I'll just end with that. And if anyone needs me, I just moved, but I'm actually here at the State Capitol Complex. I am in Building 6, and my room number is B123. And although you would think B is the basement, it's actually the first floor. So my office is very accessible when you enter Building 6. I am the only office on the first floor to the left of the doors. Our main number here is 558-0400. That will get you right to my office. There are only 3 of us here. Again, we're very accessible. Our door is always open. You can also email me at kim.p, like pumpkin, .knuckles with an N, Nuckles, at WV, stands for West Virginia, .gov. And I do my best that for one of us here within 24 hours to return your call, to return your email. And we're here if you need us. And we're so happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, for talking with us today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this so much.
Remember, if you have a legislative issue you would like Melissa and I to explore further, or you want to be featured in a future Advocate in Action segment, please let us know. You can call the ARC at 304-422-3151. And Melissa, what's your email address?
My email address is melissa.southall@peoplefirstwv.org.
And I can be reached at morgan.spicer@thearcmov.org. We would love to hear from you and have you as a future guest on our show. Next is our Advocate in Action segment. Today, our Advocate in Action is U.S. Representative Jim Langevin from Rhode Island. Congressman Langevin made the news last month after Amanda Morris wrote about his story in the Washington Post, where despite calling ahead and deciding, he was not allowed to get on his flight to Italy due to the batteries in his power wheelchair.
Thank you, Congressman, for joining us today.
Thanks, Verge, for having me on the program. It's great to be with you and your listeners and viewers, and I look forward to a great discussion today.
In the first part of this program, we spoke to Kim Knuckles, who recently became director of the Equal Employment Opportunity Office, but is also the state of West Virginia's Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator. She said one of the major issues people with disabilities face, even after 32 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act, is access, which this incident certainly fits. While we certainly want to talk about the incident with your flight, and is this the first barrier you have faced as a person who uses a wheelchair in society as a whole?
On the issue of travel, I've encountered numerous issues of accessibility, throughout my life, and whether it's not being able to get into some buildings because there's stairs and no elevator, or other things that other access barriers that happen. There are numerous barriers, and I have to say that, of course, airline travel is the most difficult, of course.
Well, everyone is going to have a different experience. What do you think people generally don't understand about people who use wheelchairs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think they they realize that the device is someone's legs. It's their ability to get around. It's their independence. It's the mobility, and anything that impedes the person getting from point A to point B is a barrier. That could be a curb with no curb cut. It could be narrow doorways. It could be a flight of stairs. Accessible bathrooms if they're not accessible. How does one use the restroom? And the list goes on and on. So the wheelchair is it's not only is it our way of getting around. It gives us independence and mobility, but it's kind of a part of who we are, right? And again, if I can't get through a doorway, then it's like saying don't apply, or don't we don't want your business. We don't want you to come in, stay out. It's the same kind of a message, if you will.
Getting back to travel, have you been successful before flying to a destination, taking your power chair with you?
Yeah, I've had more success traveling with my wheelchair than I have had problems. But I have to say, it can be very stressful, and that I never really know when I get to the airport if I'm going to encounter a poorly trained gate agent or someone who's uninformed. It didn't. Maybe this is maybe they knew, or they didn't have proper training, and so they're not up to all the safety protocols, or they think they figured it out, but they're again misinformed, not properly trained, and they deny me access to getting on the aircraft, which has happened. You have unfortunately poorly trained sometimes baggage handlers that have caused damage to the chair. They treat it like just another piece of luggage, as opposed to kind of extension of my legs, if you will, and my ability to get around. And it's been unfortunate when those things do happen. But I guess I've since I travel so much, going back and forth to DC a lot, or on congressional trips, or even personal travel, I've had mostly I have had good experiences, and on balance, percentage wise. But it's those times where I do encounter problems that they become big problems potentially, and can either delay or ruin the whole trip, or prevent the trip from happening in the first place. So any number of things can happen. For context for your viewers and your listeners, just so they understand in my case what happened, I was flying on an official congressional trip to Italy to visit a couple of our military bases there, and I got to the airport at Logan Airport, and the gate agent asked what type of batteries my wheelchair has, and I said lithium-ion batteries, knowing full well that these batteries are FAA compliant with their safety guidelines, safety rules, and they were under the watt hourage that they needed to be. Airlines say that the lithium-ion batteries, in order to fly, the FAA says that in order for the batteries to fly on the planes and the cargo hold, they have to be under 300 watt hours. And the gate agent said, "I'm sorry, but we're not going to allow your chair on the plane because of lithium-ion batteries." So unfortunately, that was a red flag right there, a problem, a barrier, and unfortunately, it didn't get better. Even though she talked to the ops agent, she went up and she spoke to her superior. They basically said that no, it doesn't meet their guidelines. They're not going to allow it, even though the FAA had approved it. So that's the experience. Unfortunately, I missed that flight. I was not able to take the chair with the lithium-ion battery on the plane, but we were able to. I was able to. My staff went to my house, got another wheelchair that's an older wheelchair with dry cell batteries, and they brought that chair up to me in Boston. But not everyone is going to have a backup chair. Not everyone is going to have a staffer that can, go to your house and drive the chair another, hour and a half to my destination where I was waiting to fly out of. And then, of course, we had to take a later flight, which got us into another airport in Italy that was far away from originally where I was supposed to go. We had to drive in the middle of the night, 3 hours to get to our hotel. And so it was kind of a nightmare scenario and unfortunate, part of, the way to start the trip. But I'm hoping to change that for others in the future.
If this happened to you on an official trip, I wonder how many people that it's happened to in other situations.
Right. That's right. They've already been, I know, numerous people that have encountered same thing, traveling for work or for personal travel. Some people have had their whole trips ruined. They've lost their, the cost of the flight, or even if they were able to get a refund for the flight, that they lost their, say they were going to a resort or hotel reservations, they had to eat that cost. And what a shame. It's just so wrong. So we need to fix this. And people in the airlines need to understand, first of all, do your research that all lithium-ion batteries are not created equal. I know there are perceptions of, the news reports of these cheap Chinese knockoffs and the hoverboards that have had problems. And, the batteries that are in these chairs, if they're FAA approved, are not the cheap Chinese knockoffs. They are, they're high-end lithium-ion batteries with safety features in them. When I take the chair to the plane, I actually have to take the joystick off of the chair. The wire disconnects, and so there's no way for the chair to power up because I've got the controller in the cabin with me, and the batteries are contained in a box. And again, they're under the 300 watt hours that the airlines and the FAA requires. And so again, the chair's been approved. The airlines should get their protocols up to date in place and not inconvenience people in the future.
There are stories across the country with not only people not being able to get on flights, but those who do may find their wheelchair was damaged by baggage handlers piling things on the chairs, etc. Is there some type of legislation or regulation that needs to be passed to fix these issues?
Yeah. So the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act is a bill that I'm putting in that would basically require the FAA to impose fines on airlines when an individual's rights are violated, when there's been an egregious breakdown in protocol and rights to violate it. Right now, the airlines, although the FAA has the ability to impose a fine if something happens, they rarely do. So this would make it mandatory that if it's determined that a passenger with disabilities rights have been violated, that it would be a mandatory fine that would be imposed. But then it would also give a private right of action for the person to have their day in court to recover damages as well. And right now, that's not possible. Under the law, it doesn't allow passengers with disabilities to sue in court if, say, their device is damaged, or they miss their trip, or and they have to eat the cost of the plane ticket or the hotel reservations or what have you. And so the Air Carrier Amendments Act would change that. But again, it would hold airlines accountable for violations, the rights of travelers with disabilities, with mandatory penalties and a private right of action. So, but I'm also working on another bill that would ensure that airlines don't discriminate against travelers who use lithium-ion batteries, and that's called the Wheelchairs on Airplanes Act. As we know, airlines lithium-ion batteries are becoming more and more popular and commonplace. And there's been numerous individuals that have already encountered problems with not being able to get their wheelchairs on the plane because of the lithium-ion batteries. And I'm one of those individuals that happened to.
We encourage people to write letters and call their lawmakers about important issues. Is there something people watching this show can do to help remedy this situation, whether it is calling their Congress members to support a bill?
Those who have an interest in this issue, either they know someone with a disability or the person with the disability themselves, can share their stories with their legislators, be proactive about sharing these problems, these stories with their members of Congress, House or Senate, whether it's or their staff. This is very important for people to really speak up and help to educate members and staff about the problems that they're encountering. That's how change happens, right? Is that you hear about these problems, and especially if if it's becomes more widespread, more individuals are impacted. It's something that gets this higher up on the radar, on the agenda of a policymaker, and hopefully again gets the policymaker to sign on to a bill, be a co-sponsor. The more co-sponsors you have, the more likely it is the bill will get a hearing or come to the floor for consideration. But it starts with individuals wanting to make a change and really wanted to speak up.
Are these bills far enough to be numbered so self-advocates can get a hold of their legislators?
Yeah. So I don't have the bill number in front of me for the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act, and the Wheelchairs on Airplanes Act is right now in the process of being introduced. So I don't have a bill number on that one, but certainly your viewers can call my office, and would be happy to provide them with that. And I can also get it back to you. You can share it with your viewers as well.
Are these issues limited only to the airlines, or are you aware of issues on trains and cruise ships as well?
Well, certainly accessibility issues are not limited to air travel, but from my personal experience, air travel is the least accessible travel option. Unfortunately, this mostly stems from my inability to fly with my own wheelchair as a result of lack of training and awareness of airline policies and laws regarding air travelers with disabilities. But I've had issues with Amtrak before, but nothing compares to my experience flying, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thanks, Doug. It's been great to be with you.
Remember, if you would like to be featured on a future segment of Advocate in Action and are using your self-advocacy skills in your life or the lives around you, we would love to have you on the show. You can call the ARC at 304-422-3151 or email me, Melissa, directly at my email address, melissa.southall@peoplefirstwv.org.
And mine is morgan.spicer@thearcmov.org. We would love to have you on a future program. With that, we are out of time for this month's episode. We would like to thank ADA Coordinator Kim Knuckles, as well as our Advocate in Action, Congressman Jim Langevin, for taking the time to speak with us. Remember, until next time, advocacy matters.
And so do you. See you next time.